Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started with our next speaker. So if I can have everybody, move closer if you need to. And we're going to go ahead and get started. And Taylor is here, right? Okay, good. All right, so, yeah, I need the whistle girl. Where'd she go? All right. Okay, so our next speaker is going to be doing a lecture on manifesting wealth. He's an eclectic person who owns a business coaching company. He's also the co-owner of Amanian Press, is that right? Which publishes esoteric nonfiction and fantasy sci-fi. He's also the author of 12 books. Please welcome Taylor Elwood.
So for today's lecture, I'll be drawing on material from Manifesting Prosperity and Manifesting Wealth. So how many of you here, show of hands, are self-employed? Some of you are, some of you aren't, so I'll accordingly tailor the presentation. So what's the first word that comes to mind when you think wealth magic? And this is, by the way, an interactive, participatory talk. Money. And lots of it. Right. So that's what I hear from most people. It's money. And I think that's and that makes sense. Most of the books out there on wealth magic typically focus on money first and foremost. In fact, most of the time, they only focus on money. Who here can tell me what the problem with that is?
It doesn't take into account.
It's one form of wealth.
It doesn't take into account that you could what, but unless you're willing to work for it, you're not going to get.
Well, there's that too.
It stops your magic from manifesting because it's not the final common desire you actually
Yes.
have before you do it.
Yes, correct. Money in and of itself is not the final outcome. And people who treat money as the end, who say, I want to make more money or something along those lines, are basically setting themselves up to fail. Because money is only a means to an end. The way that I liken it is that way back when, 10,000 years ago, the survival ticket at the time was the spear. You didn't want spears. You wanted the spear because it could get you food. Now it's the same thing with money. We use money to buy food, to pay utility bills, to get things that we want, all those other things. But the problem with the money magic books is it's always focused on, I want more money. I'm a business coach. So when I work with people and they come to me and they say that the reason they're in business is to make money, I look at them and I say, well, guess what? You're going to be out of business in under a year. And they blink and they look, why? Well, I said, because you don't have a clear, focused reason for why you're in business. Usually they can't even tell me how much money they want. They just want money. And that's what it is for most people. I want money. Well, let me tell you something. I take a different approach to wealth magic. Do I think that money is important? Yes, money is important. It's just not the most important thing because you've got to balance it with everything else. There are other forms of wealth out there. And if we don't factor those forms of wealth in, then the wealth magic that we're doing is going to be ineffective. How many of you have heard the saying that you spend your health making all your wealth, and then you spend your wealth taking care of your health? Who really wants to do that? It doesn't seem like a very good approach to wealth magic, does it? It's not. When I look at the majority of money magic, what I see is a lot of reactive magical working, and it's usually money magic to solve a problem. How many of us have done money magic to pay off a debt or solve some other short-term problem? Right. Is that really wealth magic? No, it's not, because it's a reaction to something else. If we look at the concept of wealth, wealth should be something that's proactive. Now, we live in a world of reaction, and there is ultimately only one thing that we have control over, and sometimes we don't even have complete control over that. Do you know what that is? Yourself. You don't have control over everything else out there. But the whole point of understanding that is not to say, oh, I'm going to throw up my arms and give up because, well, I don't have control over everything. It's to design how you're going to react, how you're going to respond to those situations. See, I'm big time into plans. I like to plan my life by design. I like to plan my businesses by design because when you plan something by design, it's much easier to make it succeed. It doesn't mean that you can think of every single thing that could happen. It doesn't mean that you have control over everything, but what it does mean is that you have developed a way of thinking that allows you to account for things that come your way and plan accordingly. And that makes life a lot easier. And frankly, I'm in favor of living as easy a life as possible because I don't think that life should have to be any harder than we make it. And oftentimes it's we ourselves who make life so hard. So let's explore what wealth could look like. We have money as one form of wealth. What are some other forms of wealth?
Friendship.
Friendship. Anything else?
Health.
Health?
Reputation.
Reputation?
Goats. Many, many goats.
Many, many goats.
Yeah, I was going to say property.
I was going to say stuff, but I went.
Love.
Property.
Would we say that love, right?
Time, freedom.
Time, freedom, network. If you're into networking, as far as a human-human connection, kind of resources, that could also be a form of wealth. So, and we could probably go and pick a bunch of other things that represent wealth. Now, here's an interesting thing. There are people who are rich who nonetheless do not necessarily have wealth. You say, what? Well, think about the celebrities, for example, who make tons of money and yet spend that money as soon as they get it. And so they're in debt, and once they stop making that money, they're in a pile of debt. That's what happened to Nicolas Cage, right? Or, for example, my wife, she used to live in California, and her kids went to they went to that one private school because her ex-husband worked there. And that private school had a bunch of rich people there, and so they would occasionally go to their parties. And these people they had tons of money, and all they could do was spend it on more and more things, and they were empty inside, and they were busy having affairs, and they basically were miserable people. Is that really wealth? My friend Corvus and I, we met at Convocation, and yeah, I'm calling on you, sorry. But he said something that really stuck out to me at the time in terms of how he chooses to eat food and other things, and I really admire it about him. He said, I'm not a hedonist. I'm not going to go and overly indulge in this stuff. I want to eat to enjoy. I want to do anything to enjoy it, but not to do it to the point where it's too much. I want to do it in the right amount. And that, to me, struck me as a form of wealth. I really respect that about you, Corvus. He has a really good book on wealth magic back at his booth as well called Hail Thyself, which I've read and really like. So I mention that because he's not doing a talk on it this time, but I always like promoting other people too. So when we look at wealth, we have to figure out what it is that we truly want. We have to define it. So if we're going to talk about money and we're going to define it, let's start with figuring out how much money we even want in the first place. Here's an interesting statistic for you. The majority of people who have won the lottery usually have spent all that money within the next couple of years. Why? Because they didn't understand what to do with the money. The only thing they knew how to do with it was spend it because they were living hand to mouth. So if all you know how to do is spend money, then guess what? If you win a few $1 million or more, you're going to spend it. And then you'll end up being back in debt and everything else. So the best thing we can do is, first of all, figure out what our relationship to money is. What do we want to use it for? So someone, give me an idea. What do you want to use your money for?
Vacation.
Vacations. You know, I actually call vacations holidays. I'll tell you why. Because root word of vacation is what?
To vacate.
Vacate, which implies that you're leaving something you're supposed to be at. Holiday, on the other hand, root words are holy day. Personally, I like holy days better. So going on holiday, okay, that's a good example. What's another form? What else can we use money for?
Long-term viability.
Say that again?
Long-term viability.
Long-term viability. So what do you mean by that?
I've set myself up where I will never be hungry. I'll always have a place to live. I'll always have a car to drive. I'll always have money in my pocket.
Excellent. That's a great example of money for those specific purposes. What else?
Investment in the future.
Investment in future. I'd kind of put that along with long-term viability. Build and sustain a temple. And in fact, right now they're building a library called the Neo-Alexandria Library somewhere in Delaware, where they're putting a bunch of different occult books there. And that's a perfect example of that. By getting clear on what we want to use money for, we're able to effectively work with it better. I look at money as a force of nature. And the reason I look at it as a force of nature is because if we think about it, money's been around for almost as long as humans have existed. It's come in different shapes and forms, but it's there. Money likes to move. Money does not like to sit in one place because money is all about movement. So if we understand that about money, we also can understand how the way that money moves in society, that it's also going to favor that which moves it the most. What typically moves money the most?
Trade.
Greed? Trade? Corporations, right? If you look at your credit card interest rate, usually what you're going to see is anywhere from 15 to 29% interest, right? You look at the interest rate you get on a savings account, and it's maybe 1% if you're lucky. Money does not move in our favor. It moves in the favor of the corporate machines. And so it's important to recognize that as well when we choose to work with it. So the way that I like to look at it when I'm working with money, magically and mundanely, is that I'm going to spend the time figuring out what it is that I really want with it in the first place, so that I know I can handle conceptually when I bring in more money. Because I'm always going to have something that I can do with it. Whether it's putting it into retirement savings, or it's paying off some debt. Certainly nothing wrong if we have some debt, but pay it off. Have a plan for it. Buy a house. Do something else. But know what it is that you're going to do with the money. The people who are wealthy, who got it right, are people who are very focused. They know exactly what it is they're going to use it for, and they use it in order to get what they want. The same thing applies when we look at our friendships and network. Who do we choose to associate with? What is it that we're choosing to associate with speaks as much as anything else. I'm very choosy about the type of people that I'm going to spend time with. If there's somebody who causes a lot of drama, I'm not going to spend time around that person, because what am I doing? I'm inviting that drama into my life, and I'm inviting more people who generate drama. We've all known somebody like that, right? Sometimes we may have even been that person. I know I have been on occasion. And it's okay as long as we can grow out of it. But when we consistently surround ourselves with people who are bringing us down with how they behave, what we're really doing is setting ourselves up to fail. So I look at the types of people that I want in my life. And again, a lot of this is going to sound very mundane, but it's actually very magical in its own right, because the people that I associate with are going to be people who also are generators of wealth. I go out and do a lot of networking in business, and I can tell you that one of the biggest things that spreads the wealth and helps to bring wealth back is being able to go out there and give referrals to people. So I find out what people need. I start my day out with the question, who can I help today? And why do I do that? Because if I understand what other people need, I can connect them to other people that can help them, or I can connect them to myself. And so the more I help people, the more my reputation rises, and the more I'm able to also get access to other resources that I need in order to do things and make my life simple. A lot of people don't approach it that way. They have a family, maybe they have a few friends, but they don't really look at how to create a network of support. The thing is that when we all pull together, it makes it a lot easier than if it's just one of us trying to make our own way. Let's look at relationships. We'll get to the magic part of this, I promise. We're just kind of laying the ground floor. If we look at romantic relationships, what typically ends up happening after the first 6-7 months of being with somebody? First 6-7 months, you've got the new relationship energy, the hormones are going off. That person can do no wrong. Those little annoying little habits that they have, they just kind of go to the side, right? And then one day you wake up, and you look over at that person, and you're like, that person's a fucking slob. What the fuck? What am I doing with this person that's a slob? I hate that. Right? We've all been there. If we want to look at relationships, again, we have to look at them in terms of a form of wealth. How much time do we really want to spend with somebody that is going to bring us down, that is going to sabotage us? What I would argue is that when we define what we want, one of the things that we also need to define is what we don't want. And that's actually part of wealth magic, is taking the time to define what we don't want. I use that word define a lot, because by using the word define, I'm really setting the baseline for magical work. I'll talk about this more on Sunday in the Magical Identity class, but really, when we're using the word define, what we're describing is what something ought to be, what it ought to be, what it should be. So with a relationship, I did a magical working 3 times to bring a romantic partner into my life. The first 2 times, the focus was on bringing someone into my life, I defined what I wanted, but I didn't take the time to define what I didn't want. Well, guess what happened? Those relationships didn't work out so well because I didn't know what the red flags were until too late. The last time that I took the time to define what I didn't want as well as what I wanted, then I brought a partner into my life who's over there, and she fit me exactly. Now, there were things that I didn't know about her. There were things I couldn't have factored in, even with doing the magical working that I did. But the whole point is that I found somebody who fit me really well, and made my life much easier, made her life easier as well, because we found out that we had a lot in common. So now let's take this and actually approach it on a magical level. We've got the mundane idea down. Figure out what it is you want. All right, you figured out what you want. Now, what are you going to do to actually use magic to bring it into the picture? Well, first of all, part of the reason I say define what you want is because by defining the result, you work backwards. You figure out what the process is going to be that you're going to use in order to manifest what you're going to do. The second thing I'm going to say is that inevitably with wealth magic, you must marry mundane actions with magical actions. It's not enough to just do magic. For example, if you come to me and you say, I did a wealth magic working to manifest my ideal career and nothing happened, I'm going to say, well, what else did you do? And if you said, I didn't go out there and fill out applications, and I didn't send in resumes, and I didn't go on interviews or anything else, well, I'm going to say, no, duh. Of course it didn't work. You were just there. You were just sitting there with a thumb up your ass, waiting for someone to come. Doesn't work that way. We must know what the mundane actions are. If I'm going to enchant for a romantic partner, I need to go to places where I'm going to probably meet that partner. If I'm going to enchant to bring more money into my life, I better have some very specific ideas about what I'm going to do to help bring that money into my life. So when we look at this notion of wealth magic and we bring in the magical aspect, we better be very clear on whatever it is that we're working with, whatever it is that we're doing, and be able to say, here's what I'm already doing. So let me give you an example of that and introduce the first technique as well. In 2011, I was a social media consultant. Been doing social media consulting for a couple years. I hated it. The reason I got into it was because I'd gotten my coaching certification back in 2008, and in August of 2008, my tech writing job wrapped up. I started looking for work. Everything just kind of bottomed out. Nobody was hiring for months because the economy had just gone to crap. And I was like, I've got to find something that people are going to pay money for. So I got into social media because I knew technology. I did it mainly to make money. Well, we already know what a mistake that was. Some of us have to learn the hard way, though, and I'm one of those people. So in 2011, I'm with Kat at this point, and I'm pretty miserable, and she says, why don't you just take some time off and figure out what you really want to do, what calls to you? I'm like, no, I can't really do that, no. So finally I say, all right, I'm going to work with a goetic demon named Bune, and I'm going to ask Bune to be my patron wealth deity for my business. He's going to be the go-to guy for me. And you'll note that you can't really see it here, but I have Bune's sigil on the Manifesting Wealth cover. So I go to him, and first thing he says to me, we do our working, we come to our agreement. Our agreement is I'm going to promote him whenever I do talks about business or wealth magic. So obviously I'm talking about him right now, fulfilling my end of the bargain. That's why his sigil's on the cover. And I say, all right, great, I'm going to do all that for him, and he's going to do these things for me. And he says, I'm going to give you some advice about business. I'm going to give you some ideas. I'm going to point you in some different directions. I'm not going to do it for you, but I'll help you figure things out. So we sit down and we start talking, and the first thing he says to me is, you hate doing what you do, so you need to figure out what it is you really want to do. What is it that you like about your current career that you can use to guide you? So I spent some time thinking about it, and I realized that what I like is talking with people and interacting with them and helping them. I don't like the technology. I don't want to use it. But I like the people. So what do? By the end of 2011, I switched over to business coaching. My wife breathed a sigh of relief. He's finally doing something about this instead of being miserable. And at the same time, he says to me, you know, you've written all these books, but you haven't turned that into a business. It's just kind of a hobby for you. It's time to turn your occult books into a real business. Go out there and put together classes and start hitting the convention circuit more and everything else. So I follow his advice, and what I find is that at the beginning of 2012, things start to really come together. I'm starting to make more money than I've made before, because I actually am following the advice of this wealth entity. So here's the thing. You say, okay, Taylor, this sounds great for business. Those of us who are self-employed, great, we can work with Bune, we can work with some other type of wealth deity or entity. But what about those of us who aren't self-employed? What are we going to do with that? Well, I'm going to tell you that you can have a wealth entity for your life, for your career, as well as for your business. So, who are some other types of wealth entities? Let's say you don't want to work with Bune. Who else could you work with that could be a patron spirit for your business or for your life in general, for wealth?
Ganesh one.
Ganesh could be one, yeah. Ganesh definitely takes care of obstacles. He's one of the ones that I work with as well. Bill?
Hathor.
Hathor?
Fortuna.
Fortuna? Huh?
Eshu.
Oh, Eshu? Okay.
Paimon.
Paimon, sure. Paimon. Oshun? Lakshmi? How about Hades? Okay, Hades is god of the underworld, right? But also, Earth has all those minerals and resources. Coincidentally, Bune is also a demon of the underworld. Resources. Right? So we've got these different types of wealth beings that we can work with if we want to. Now, here's the thing. They're not going to do all the work for us. They're willing to help us out, but we've got to be willing to help ourselves out as well. So in Bune's case, he would say to me, you got to go and do these things, here's some things, and then he would say, go out and network. Go out and write some articles. Go out and get set up. Go and create some classes. Go do these other things. And every time I followed his advice, lo and behold, more business would flow my way. Still following his advice to this day. If we apply it to your life, it's the same thing. You could have a wealth entity for your career. You could have a wealth entity for other specific areas. In fact, one of the things that I like to do to help create this is to actually have a wealth altar in my home. So the wealth altar is going to be a specific space that is set up to what I consider to be wealth. Now, we already established earlier that wealth isn't just money. So I have Bune at my altar. I also have Ganesh. But I have other things too that signify what wealth is to me. And I've made it very clear to these deities that I work with what wealth. For example, I have a picture of my wife and my 2 kids, because those are important parts of wealth. I have a couple books on there, including a book on networking, because networking is a form of wealth to me. I have health records actually stored underneath the altar because it's a filing cabinet that I put it on. So I have health records stored in there. That's part of wealth. Whatever you consider wealth to be, that's what you put on your wealth altar. It's not just the money. I do have a little money truck on there, the pennies and all that stuff, and I take the money and donate it into my bank account at the end of each month. So, I mean, you know, there's that as well. But the whole point is that it's not going to just be money. It's going to be other things. It's going to be whatever you consider wealth to be. And your definition of wealth may very well differ from mine. That's fine. But the point is, get specific about it. Now, let's look at a couple of other ways we can work with entities. I'm also a big believer in creating magical entities. I actually wrote a book long time ago with a couple other authors called Creating Magical Entities. And we have a little worksheet in there. So, with the idea of creating a magical entity, the whole point of creating is you might be too close to the situation. So I'm going to use an example from my wife. A couple years ago, she moved up from California to Portland. Actually, more than a couple years ago. Yeah, over 4 years ago. She just kind of looked at me and she's like, couple? No. I get it, okay. She was very frustrated because she could not get a job in the industry that she was used to. She'd been working there for 19 years. The reason they weren't going to hire her, guess what? Too much experience means that they're going to have to pay her too much. Pretty frustrating. So she's starting to do some job hunting. She knows a few people in the area, but she's essentially, it's not an area that she's been in, and the type of industry it is once you're in one area, that's the area you stay for the rest of your life. So you can imagine this is pretty frustrating. So we created an entity called Good Job, and the purpose of Good Job wasn't just to find her a job. We made this a proactive entity. Why did we make it proactive? Because we didn't want to just have her get a job. We wanted to think long term. So when we first created this, I had her define salary, I had her define benefits, I had her define what it was that she was looking for, ideal workspace, et cetera, et cetera. Shortly after we created it, she gets an interview for the ideal job. Perfect salary, everything else. Doesn't get it. You're saying, okay, well, you created this entity. She didn't get the job. Must not be working that well. A couple weeks later, she gets a part-time job doing some of the same stuff, and it gets her in front of the people she needs to get in front of. And then, mysteriously enough, in an industry where this normally doesn't happen, in October, the same job opens up. She has another chance at that job, and she interviews again, and she starts working there in November. Now, she's told when she's hired on that it's temporary. This means that this means at the end of the year, she's going to no longer have a job. But it's full-time work, and she gets that time in front of those people. June rolls around, she no longer has the job. She ends up applying for a better position, gets that position. 3 years later, applies for 2 jobs, gets both of them, and gets put in and gets a chance to interact with all of those people that are influencers, and then gets the job of her choice that she wanted. And so, how does this all work? Well, the entity that we created, it didn't just help her find a job. It was set up that it would also help her get in front of the right people and continue getting to know them, and that it would help to make her stand out to the people who would want to give her promotions. That it would continue to put her into situations where she would shine. Now, some of that's just her own natural abilities, but it enhanced what it is that she does. And we made this proactive. We also made sure that when we fed this entity, it would feed off of any frustration related to the job hunt or anything along those lines. But more importantly, we made sure that it fed off of the networking activities, that it fed off the actual job application process. Fill out a job application, you fed the entity. Go into an interview, you fed the entity. Go and talk to people and network with them, guess what? You're feeding the entity. So that entity is going to continue to work its magic because it's taking these ordinary activities and turning them into a source of fuel for itself. It's motivated to do the work that's going to help it and her succeed. And again, it's not all based on the entity. She has to do her own part. She has to actually go into the job, do the work, etc., etc. But the whole point is that we created this proactive approach that made it a lot easier. And at the same time, we removed the obstacle of being too close to the situation. Because anyone who's job hunted knows that when you're too close to the situation, you're going to get depressed, you're going to get upset, there's going to be days where you're really going to hate doing it. So it's a good idea that if you're going to do magic for that you bring something out there a little further out. So that's an example of career magic at work. Now, back in my days when I worked as a tech writer, I did some career magic of my own. I worked at Boeing, and I had this boss that was a bit of a psycho, short little guy, and just his stack would go off, everything else. One of the things I did is I created an entity out of the name of the project I was working for. and I basically used that entity to help me learn the concepts quicker so that I would stand out better. The other thing I did is I worked with the corporate entity. It was Boeing at the time, so I had a blue and white plane. I made offerings to that blue and white plane every so often. That blue and white plane loved me. It made me stand out. You know what else I did is I went into his office one day when he wasn't there, and I set up little energetic pillows, and they were designed to soften his emotional rages and get him to leave me alone. He became a lot friendlier after that, so easy to work with. For me, anyway. I don't know about anyone else there. Other people were still kind of living in fear of him, but for me, he just kind of left me alone, let me do my own thing. Which meant that I spent half the day surfing the internet and the other half writing. You can see why I'm self-employed now, by the way. I'm much more productive. So that's how we can work with entities. That's some career and wealth magic ideas there. But let's take it down a little bit further. I did throw in the energetic pillows and things like that if you don't want to work with entities. If we were going to do working for, say, a business, what are some things that we could do? I'm going to put this out here to you. I'm going to bring you guys in. What's a wealth magic working that we could do that in regards to money? You could what? Charging of the brand logo. Sacrificing money. In fact, one of the things that I actually do is I give to specific charities. So for example, I have a charity that I give to elephants. Why? Because it honors Ganesh. Also, I happen to love elephants. I have another charity that I give to where it actually goes to people who are accused of witchcraft in third world countries. They don't necessarily practice magic, but they get stoned to death anyway, so let's actually do something for them. What else could we do in terms of a wealth magic working? Like if we wanted to, say, do a wealth magic working for a specific purpose in our life, like getting a car or getting a better job or something else, what are some other things that we could do?
I would buy some stock.
Buy some stock, okay, and then what would you do magically to help with that stock?
I'd feed it.
Okay, and how would you feed it?
I'd keep increasing my wealth in that stock.
Okay. Would you do anything for the company itself? I mean, let's say the company starts to go through rough times. You could be feeding that stock a lot, but if the company's going through rough times,
then I'd take care of myself.
okay. I would probably look at doing some magic around the company itself, seeing what I could do to enhance the effectiveness of that company, seeing what I could do to help the people there, something along those lines. I see some hands up here.
What about, let's say you wanted a car, and so you visualize everything about the thing itself, but you volunteer your labor as a sacrifice for a car wash or something. I don't know.
So this is what I would do. Years ago, I needed a car because I needed it because I needed to go to convention scenes. I was a poor grad student on $1,000 a month, and I did not have the means to just go out there and buy even a used car. But I needed the car because I'd started writing, and I wanted to go to some of those conventions. I created three sigils. One was related to a troublesome coworker who I couldn't stand and who was being a pain in the ass. Another was related to the car that I wanted to get, and specifically it was related to finding some way for me to be able to get that car without me having to get another job, because I didn't have time to go and work for someone else when I was already doing the doctorate program and doing all the work. It's just pretty intensive. And the third thing was for something else in my life. I don't know what it was at the time. So I did this thing where I charged each sigil up and I connected them together, and the idea was that when one of them resolved, the other two would resolve as well, and I would get, each thing would come together. The only thing that was related to them was me. So what I ended up doing is part of how I set up the thing for the car was that I would be able to get a sum of money that would allow me to buy a car. It wouldn't harm anyone, but it would allow me to, I would get that sum of money in some form or manner, the exact amount that I needed. I needed like $3,000, so I put it out there that I was going to get that. What ended up happening is a couple weeks later, after I'd done these sigils, I charged them up and then I burned them and scattered the ashes out on the side of the road. What ended up happening a couple weeks later is that my dad called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and I wanted to know, is there something you really want right now?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm trying to buy a car, and I need some money for it." Da, da, da. And he said, "Well, I'm going to send you a check for $3,000." And I was like, "Wow!" And this is, bear in mind that my dad is not necessarily always so generous. I was like, "Wow, this is really cool." So lo and behold, got that check and bought the car I wanted. And that was a form of wealth magic. Now, what helped is that I was very clear on what I wanted to use that car for. It wasn't just having the car. I wanted the car so I could go to conventions. So I needed a car that could travel a certain distance. It had reasonable repairs. I also wanted the car because I was tired of walking in the snow to go get my groceries. Walking half hour one way, half hour the other way. That just sucked. It improved my life immeasurably by having that car. But I was very clear on not just the car itself, but on those other outcomes that were going to result. Let's look at a wealth magic working we might do to bring somebody into our life. A couple ways that we could approach it. It depends on the person we want to bring into our life. So for example, years and years ago, I moved to Kent, Ohio. I don't know anybody in the area. And I want to get connected to the pagan community. What I did is the first time I met somebody who was in the pagan community, this was a person who was at the school itself. They didn't really know anybody either. I took the sensation of meeting with them, those experiences, and I evoked it. I put it out there into the environment with the idea being that it would help me find the next person that I would want to meet that would be pagan. And suddenly I started getting an intuitive ping. It would say, "Go over here to this event," or go for a walk, or something like that. And I would end up meeting someone. And then what would happen is I'd evoke it again. I kept evoking the idea that it would eventually run out. It was charged by the experience of meeting the person. Within about 2-3 weeks, I'd met a lot of the pagan community in Kent, Ohio, and had set myself up with a nice little network of people that I knew. That's one approach, but let's talk about it in regards to love. What is it that we could do for a love working? So I'm going to put that out there to you again. So what would you do if you wanted to bring somebody into your life? You want a romantic partner.
Manifest Lilith.
Manifest Lilith, okay.
Tell her you want a devil worshiper.
All right.
Nurse.
Excellent. I believe there's one back there, in fact. All right. So, what else could we do?
I have a friend who hung out in the women's section of upscale stores and made himself available, and he found the love of his life by watching what women bought. And when he saw a woman that interested, no matter what she was buying and wearing, he said, "I bet that would look fantastic on her." And it worked. It would work for me.
Okay. Be a little creepy.
I was surprised he didn't get kicked.
Most women I know would find that pretty creepy. I'll put it that way.
You get a human-shaped candle, the sex you want. Get some herbs, the qualities you want. You put it on there. Light that thing up. Just focus on that flame until you just see the flame. And everything either goes to white or black behind it. And then just visualize it the whole time it's burning.
Okay. So let me share with you what I did. Each time, I might add, because it worked 3 times. The third time was the charm, because I got it right. The third time was, first 2 times I only defined what I wanted. I wrote down what it was I was looking for. The last time I wrote what I didn't want, and then I wrote down what I wanted. Incidentally, this is a good business practice as well. If you're self-employed, write down the types of clients you don't want as well as the types of clients you do want. If you know what you don't want, then you'll avoid those toxic clients that are going to waste your time. Anyway, getting back to the whole love thing, after I did that, I took a bunch of magazines and I started cutting them up. I cut out phrases that describe the person. I cut out images. Be careful with the images, by the way. The first time I did this working, I manifested my ex-wife. I actually had a picture of her that I put in there. I didn't realize who that was at the time, but that's who I ended up manifesting. I met her months later, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's you. Yeah, that freaked us both out. So I was always careful about images after that. But anyway, go in there and cut out those relevant images, things like that. And then afterwards, in a creative frenzy, glue them all together onto a blank piece of paper. Create a collage. This works for business as well. Create a vision board is what they call it in business speak. And afterwards, hang it up on the wall, whatever, or burn it, whatever you need to do. But put it out there. And set a specific timeline. So for me, it was in her case, it was I wanted to meet this person within a year, and I met her within a few months. And it worked because I created this process where first cutting the magazines, everything, I cut away the meetings associated with them, glued them onto the paper, creating my own meetings, and in that process charged it up and fired it. Did a little bit of sex magic as well, never hurts. You know, do a little bit of wanking, whatever, boom, orgasm, there you go, and out into the universe it goes, right? So,
someone you love, anyway.
right. So, getting back to the matter at hand, when you do this working, though, think about not just what you do or don't like. Think about where you're going to be with this person 5 years from now, 10 years, 15, 20, etc. Because majority of times, what do we see in our culture when it comes to love? We see people either in conflict, drama llama, breaking up with each other, I hate you, ripping out hair and all that good stuff. Or we see people falling in love, those initial 6 months, poetry readings and all kinds of other things, looking lovey-dovey into each other's eyes. All that romantic crap, right? No, you got to think about where you're going to be 5 years from now. You don't see songs about somebody who's waking up beside somebody they've been with for 25 years. You don't have songs like that for the most part, right? You don't see things like that. But that's what you need to focus on. Where are you going to be 5, 10, 15, 25 years from now, 30 years from now with this person? And of course, what is it that you're going to be willing to do? So when I looked at my love working, it wasn't even just doing the love magic. Afterwards, it was figuring out the activities that was going to make it a proactive relationship. So Kat and I, we read books on finances, love, and spirituality together and talk about them. Why? Because it forces us to have proactive conversations around these things. If I read a book about love, about conflict in love, and she reads it at the same time and we talk about the things that bring about conflict for us, how much more likely is it for us to avoid getting into a long, protracted reaction cycle? Much more likely. We're going to avoid all those reactions because we're going to know how to talk to each other, because we can say, well, when I read this in this book, it brought this out of me. Oh yeah, it brought that out of me, and so now we know, and so when we get into a situation that next time, it makes it easier for us. And in fact, I would say that in general, she and I have very few of those reactive cycles in place because we're able to talk to each other and work things out pretty quickly. We start to notice it, get out of it. We even have a safe word for it, cacao. Hopefully all of you get the Portlandia reference. So my point to you about wealth magic is, don't make it about the money. Make money part of it. Understand where money fits into your life, what the purpose of it is. But also understand the other things that are wealth. Define those. And then when you're doing magical workings, figure out what it is that you're willing to do, mundanely as well as magically, in order to manifest it. It's as simple as that. We only make it more complicated because we get focused on not designing our life. We get focused on just living in the here and now. But if you know what you really want, if you know who you really want, it'll be easy. You'll make things manifest because you'll plan it out. And that's really the secret to wealth magic.
If I may just add something on the love front, I think for most of the people in this room, one of the things that we forget is how completely fucking weird we are. And since we're so used to being weird, people may be attracted to us on a level, for whatever reason, you know. But after those months go by and they see some of stuff that looks like the Twilight Zone, they rip off their clothes, not in a good way, and go straight into the
Well, this actually brings up a related topic to that, is that define what your interests are. What do you have in common? You know, if magic is important to you, then you better make sure that that ideal partner that you're going to manifest also practices magic. If you're a board game sci-fi geek like me, then it might be a good idea to make sure that person is into it as well. That was one of the things. The person I was previously married to, we had nothing in common beyond magic. And we didn't even have that in common for very long because we went different paths. Whereas Kat, she and I have pretty much everything in common. We like to watch the same shows, we like to play board games, we like to read the same types of books, we're history nerds, etc., etc. Makes it a lot easier to live with her, and I think she finds it easier to live with me too. Any questions? No? Okay, great. I'm going to be over there where there are books, so if you're interested in getting books signed or anything like that, or just coming and chatting with me, there I am.
That was great, Taylor. Thank you.
I had that, yeah.